Hey guys, so this week we missed the tech session because of the emergency issue that we had, but I decided that we should not miss any tech sessions because it's the plan has been made accordingly. So that's why I'm creating this video, because the next session will be on AngularJS. And before even we start AngularJS, I think it's pretty important for us to know a little bit of JavaScript, the basics mostly. So before I start, I would like to talk about a little bit about why you should learn JavaScript actually. So the benefits of learning JavaScript is that it's very easy. First of all, it's very easy to learn. Learning a new language is no harm for anyone. So yeah, that's first point for me. And the second point is that it's an interpreted language, which means that you don't need any actual a lot of setup to run a JavaScript code. As long as you have a browser, or as long as you have Node.js in your system, you can literally run any JavaScript code because it's an interpreted language, and your browser has a JavaScript interpreter, and the Node.js obviously comes up with a JavaScript interpreter. And another thing is like the learning curve for JavaScript is very straightforward. So building up something using JavaScript is very easy, and obviously the most powerful one is that JavaScript is being used in all the different life cycle of an web app these days. So previously it was only limited to the front end, and with Node.js it has become available everywhere now. In every layer of your application you literally can use JavaScript, and it's very fast based on you. Like it can be amazing, like when you want to develop a system in a very short amount of time, but also want to maintain the quality and everything. You can do that using JavaScript very easily. Anyways, enough of pep talk. Let's start with the actual learning. So I'll start with the basic stuff, the variables, like how we can define the variables in JavaScript, the scope, functions, callbacks, and closures, and few other a little bit advanced stuffs. But let's get started first. So for me, the browser itself is a very good starting point. As I said, it has an embedded JavaScript interpreter. So so I just opened the browser and then pressed Command-Shift-I, or maybe in your laptop Control-Shift-I, which is the shortcut for opening the inspect panel. And there you should go to console, and then you'll be able to write any JavaScript code you want. So how do we define variables in JavaScript? In JavaScript, previously we used to define variables using var. So whenever you define any variable, you use just var. And the funny part is JavaScript is a dynamic language. What does that mean is that every time you define a variable or anything, it does not have an actual type. The type gets deducted by the system in runtime based on the value you have assigned to it. So for example, I've assigned a value which is a number, but I can always do this, which will make a as a string. So if we check the type of a, which is a string, right? Now let's try one thing more. So these days we define variables in a different way in JavaScript, which is let. So if I try to do let a3, as you can expect, I'll get an error because a is already defined, right? So we cannot do that. Okay, that's fine. So why is let different from variable? I mean var. I'll explain it in a little bit later when we see how JavaScript functions are written and what the scope of a function is. At that time I'll explain you like what is the necessity of var and what is the necessity of let. Okay. Right. Another thing is, important thing is, like these days it's a new addition, you can define constants. Once you define a constant, if you assign another value to it, you will get an error. Pretty obvious. Right. So I'm going a little bit faster because I want to cover this up as this basic topics in let's say 20 minutes or not more than 30 minutes. So that's why I'm going a little bit faster. You can always reach out to me with the questions you have. Okay, so how do we define a function in JavaScript? It's, as I say, JavaScript is pretty easy, and actually it's like, you know, very easy to learn because of the syntax. So in JavaScript you define function as like this: function A and then this. So you can literally do this: console.log hello. So if I call the function, it will say hello. Okay, I don't care about that undefined thing right now that's coming up in your console. Your function is working pretty fine. It's printing out the log. I'll explain undefined in maybe some other session. Okay, so let's explain the scope a little bit. So whenever we create a function in JavaScript, it's actually it actually has a, like, you know, scope. So we already know what a function scope is. Like, whatever you define inside of a function, it's defined inside of the function. It does not have any existence outside, right? Okay, so but there's something that you can do. Like, for example, let's say let's write something like this: hello, and it's a function, but it has, let's say, another variable inside, world called Australia, right? And it returns a function, let's say, and in JavaScript you can always create an anonymous function like this. So you see, I didn't give the function a name, I'm just creating, but it's actually creating a valid function, and it's returning that. And what I'm doing is like return function. Let's make this function to take something in, so I'll say it's an input, and then what we'll do is like console log. We'll first print the world and then the input. So this is a little bit interesting thing, right? So you are returning a function inside of a function, and that the function that's getting returned, it's actually printing a world. And where is the world defined? Actually here in the base function. So as you can understand from the flow, it's an anonymous function, it's getting returned. So my question is, will this world be available to this function actually? Let's see. So we define the function. Now let's call hello. So as you can know, hello returns a function, so it's already is giving a hint that if you call hello, it's returning a function, and you have to make a second call by some input, let's say my name. Okay, so as you can see, it's interesting, right? It's that even if the function it generated, it's an anonymous function, it actually has a sort of reference to the variable that was defined inside of the base function, so it could print the world name very easily. So in JavaScript world, this is called closure. So when you define a function like this, it's actually a closure because it has the scope. This in the function you define inside of here, it actually has the scope from the outer function as well, so it has access to those functions. So now let's explain the global scope. So in JavaScript, you can consider the whole thing whenever you write a JavaScript code. Let's say the common pattern of JavaScript, writing a JavaScript code. Okay, I'll just open VS Code from here. Okay, and I'll try to create a new file. I'm sorry. Okay, I'll try to create a new file, and first of all, let's save it as a JavaScript file. So in the desktop, we say sample.js. Okay, so and then let's say you do this name, and you say hello, blah blah blah, whatever. But what do you think these things are going, right? So let's say I define function hello, and this there's a console.log something. Okay, right. So now let's say I am calling the function as well. right? So you can literally run this code. So let's get back to desktop first, where our file is. Then you can run this file using node. So if you say node sample.js, it actually ran the function, as you can see. So it printed something, right? So the thing is, whenever you wrote a file like this, whenever you wrote something, it's actually getting defined in the global scope. So in the outer space, you can consider this. The global scope is a very big function, which is wrapping all the functions, all the code that we are writing. You can think of it like that. That's how the global scope is like. So the problem is, like, let's say, as I was saying before, that why let was introduced, right? So see, whenever we have, let's say we have so many files in our projects like this, right? And we import those files, we use it. The problem with var is it's defined in the global scope, and it's actually a part of global scope even though it's defined in a separate file. So if you define so it's inside of sample.js and you create another file, you define another var or something, but at the compile time those variables are available to the global scope itself. So those variables, if there is a variable which is a function, they all have, you know, access to each other, which is very harmful, right? So this let thing is a little bit different than var. Whenever you define let, it creates a scope of itself. Like whenever it's whenever we are saying a function let a in a separate file, what is it doing is that this let is defined in a scope for this file only. So whenever you do an import, it's importing a scope itself. So what is the difference when you define a variable using let? Try to understand that as, like, for this file itself, it will create a scope itself. So every single file, separate file, will have a separate scope of itself rather than defining the variables in the global scope. Okay, so I have explained the closure, I have explained the difference between let and var. I know these are a little bit overwhelming. The thing is, whenever you define anything in JavaScript, that can be variable. So even a function can be a variable. So you can literally do this. Let something equals to a function. You can literally do this and it's totally valid, and it means something is actually a variable type of function. You can use this. Cool, right? And also a little bit confusing, I guess. It's fine, it will get better. Okay, so the next point is, let me quickly check my topics list. The next point is callbacks. When we use callbacks, so in JavaScript world, callback is a very common thing. So let's say you have a common function and it does something. Okay, it does some heavy work here, and what you want to do is, like, after the work is done, you want to get notified that okay, the work is done. In JavaScript, mostly all the works that are done, they can be pretty much asynchronous if you want to. But if you want some work to be synchronous, if you want some work will be done and after that some other work will be done, at that time you will use a callback sort of approach. So you will send, so whatever function or whatever module you create, you define a file, let's say this function, right? You do some heavy work here, and once you're done, how do you notify the outer world? It's like, this is the callback. You get the callback as an input and you call it, and you can also pass other information to it. Let's say you wanna pass a data, that's completely fine. So this callback based approach is actually a lot similar to an event driven approach. Like whenever your function is done, it's actually emitting an event to an outer hook. That's how it's informing that okay, I'm done and this is the output that I have generated. Okay, nice. Okay, so that's callback. Closure is done. Okay, let's see array. A few methods that will be very useful for us. So I'm sure a lot of us already use Lodash, and the the thing is, Lodash is an extensively, how should I put it, like it's an extremely useful library, but at the same time it's pretty verbose, and it comes with a lot of, like, you know, it's a very big module. So sometimes what we can do is, like, the thing is, in the JavaScript, it has got enriched over the time. So in these days, for array or any collection manipulation, you don't even need a Lodash, because it has almost everything. So let's take a look at the for each function. So let's say in JavaScript, defining an array is very fun. It's very easy. 1, 2, 3, and as I was saying, the type of your variable is defined by the value you have assigned to it. So if you consider that this array is consisting of a lot of variables, let's say this is a variable, this is a variable, you can literally have one variable that's a string. You can have one variable that's a float. That's completely fine in JavaScript, because that array is a dynamic array, and it in different positions, that element it's holding, it can be anything. It can be anything, and the value you assign to, based on that, the interpreter decides the type in the runtime. Anyways, let's see how the for each work. So it's very simple. It takes a callback. This is why I was talking about a callback. So the for each actually takes a callback, and that callback, it will call your callback with the items one by one. So if we say that for this array, do a for each. So for each is actually a method defined for an array. So whenever you define an array, it has a for each method, so you can literally use it, and then you send a callback, and this callback can be an anonymous function, and you will get your items here. So if you do a console log, it will do iteration on your array one by one, and it will print the items. So let's see if we can see the items, right? Yeah, see, it has printed all the items. Nice, right? If you want to get the index of the item, you can do that as well. So if we do this, so as you can see, the index is also good. Nice. Now let's say we want only to get the numbers out of array. So array also has another useful method which is called filter, which also takes a callback, but it takes the callback which is a predicate. What does a predicate mean? So a predicate is a conditional callback. So it will send you the items like for each, but then what you have to do is, like, you have to give it the condition based on which it will decide that which items to return. So for example, in our case, we want the items, we want to extract the items which are numbers. So the way you do it is that type of item equals number. Okay, so this function is a callback again. Filter is fitting your function with the items, and you are deciding which item to be returned. Only the items which are of number type, you return them. So if you run this, what it will return is a filtered list. So let's print out this, and that should contain only the numbers. See, the array got filtered, and we did not get the string item. We just got the number. So this is an interesting part as well. So in JavaScript, normally the integers and floaters are actually considered as just numbers. You can also, like, differentiate them using other types like floats and everything, but normally they're of number types. Okay, so another useful thing, and let's say now that we have this array, we want to see if we can map it to something else. For example, if it's a string, then we will say string. If it's a number, we'll say it number. So what I want is, like, instead of sending me the actual array, send the array of the types of the items. So we expect something like this. For the first number, type is number, number, and then string, so on. Okay, so you get the point, right? So how do you do it actually? There's another very cool feature in array which is called map. What it does is like it runs again like a for each one by one on your items, and for each item it gives you a function callback again where you can decide like what will you be returning for that item. So it gives you the opportunity to manipulate the item or change it or even return something totally different. So that's what we are gonna do here. So let's write the callback again. So it's gonna get the item. So one thing is important, like all this callbacks also has the index. So if you ever need to access the index, it's just the second parameter of the function. So this is also another cool thing in JavaScript, that if a function, let's say this function, so as you can understand, this anonymous function is actually getting invoked by the filter method itself, right? So this anonymous function is our actually an anonymous callback that we have created, right? So this function is calling this function with some parameter. So the thing is, if in JavaScript you can literally define which parameter, like, so in the sequence of the parameter it will be received. So if you don't define index, it will not be, of course your function will not be accepting the index, but it will not generate any error, even though filter is actually returning the index as well as the second parameter. Anyways, so for map, what I was saying is that we want to return the type of the item. Okay, so instead of the item, return the type of the item. So let's see, let's print this out now. See, we got the mapped, like for each number we got their types. So even though your array is 1 2 3 something something something, you return something else. So this is the power of map. Now let's come to the point of reduce. What is a reduce? So to explain the case of a reduce, it's like, let's say you want to calculate the summation of the numbers in the array. Okay, so in that case, let's say we convert this to a pure number numerical array. So and now you want to calculate the sum. What you can do is, like, you can have for each and everything like that, right? But what if we could do something like this? Okay, so the first thing we get is, of course, the callback. It also gets the item again, but it also gets the summation, the reduction. It also get the reduction, as in something like this. Let me show you. It will be like reduction, as in, let's say, sum and item. So what we would do is like return sum equals to sum plus equals item. Okay, and the last thing that we have to do is, like, we have to give the initial summation value, which is 0. So it's a little bit confusing to understand, but let me try to explain it in a little bit easier way. So what it takes is, like, same the one of the callbacks, but it has a spatial parameter, which is it can be anything. So based on your case, in our case, is that I want to calculate the sum. So I have given it an initial value, and it starts from that initial value. So sum is 0 in the first iteration, and your item gets in, and you return sum plus equals item. So the first iteration the value is 1. In next iteration sum is 1 and your item is 2. So after second iteration the value is 3. So as you can see, it's going one after another and doing the summation, and after that it will return the ultimate addition of all these values of array. So if we run the code now, see, it has done a decent job by like adding them up. So there are a lot of other cases where you would need to use this. Let's say there are complex objects, JavaScript objects are as items in your array, and you want to merge them all together. In that case as well, you can use a reduce to create a flat one single object out of all the objects in that array. Okay, so I think this makes sense. If it does not, so you can always reach out to me. Okay, let's move to the next topic, which is string. So I'll show again a few basic things in string that you can do. So a string in JavaScript is also again very fun to define. It's just this is a string. Okay, so the string itself is an array. It's a character array, right? So it does have most of the methods that an array has, but it obviously does not have it has for each, it has map, and it has filter, but it does not have reduce. But you can do many other more things with a string. For example, you can do this like to check for a substring inside of a string. So if I do this, it should print true because we is in the given string. So as you can see, it's true, right? Okay, another important and few cool features from string is that you can always do a to lowercase. So let's say if it was like this, as you can understand, it will be printed in smaller letters. You can do uppercase as well. At this moment, maybe you were wondering why I'm showing you this very basic stuff. The reason is these are the things that you will need most. So I think it just makes sense for you to have a little bit introduction with all these things. Okay, never mind. I'm moving to the next topic, which is objects. So in JavaScript, I think all of you know about JSON. So JSON is actually the JavaScript notation of objects. So in JavaScript, that notation was first introduced. So the thing is, in JavaScript, we define object as like this, very, very simple. That's it. S is an object now. So if you do a console.log type of S, let's see what it shows. As you can understand very easily, it will be an object, right? Okay, so an object is in JavaScript, an object is like a key value pair. So you can also consider this as a hash map. Okay, so you can do this, or you can do even this. Like it can have a lot of nested objects in it, inside of it, right? Okay, so if you print out the object itself, you will see everything inside of it. So let's see. Okay, this is cool. It does not print anything. And why is that so? Because we did not save. Okay, my bad. Let's try once again. Okay, yeah, see, it's printing all the items inside of the object. Now there are a few important method that's available in the object. This is the definition of an object in JavaScript, and it's also a helper, like it's sort of a library kind of module that it has some method that you can use. So you can always do this, like object dot keys. It will return all the keys in an object, right? So you can do this, key1, key2 in the S1 object. Another important amazing thing actually is that when you want to create a shallow copy of an object, right? So let's say I have this object S. So in JavaScript, one thing is very common and a mistake that we do a lot is that in JavaScript everything is passed by reference. So let's say I've created this S, right? And now let's say I have created a function, and let's say it takes a param, and what we do is like we expect that it has a key and we assign some value to it. Okay, so now let's say we call he with S. What do you think will happen? So in other languages, in a lot of other languages, for example, let's say Java, in whatever you pass, it's a pass by value. So what does that mean is like when even though you're calling HES, like the he function with S, it's actually sending a copy of the the actual variable. But in JavaScript it's a little bit problematic. It actually passes the actual reference. So if you change anything inside of it, it will be reflected here. So let's say I'm calling this function, so ideally it should not be changing this variable. It should get just the copy of this, but it's not the case. So let's print the s dot key after this and before this. Okay. So as you can see, before it was 12 and now it's 45. Of course, it makes sense, right? The thing is, the function changed the value of it. And also you can see there's a difference between the colors. So 12 is yellow because it's a number, 45 is a string, that's why it's white. Anyways, the important point here is that whenever you pass an object to your function, the function, if it does mutate, it's actually mutating the actual object. So in a lot of cases you'll find that it's just better if you can do if you can do a copy of the object. So how do you actually make a shallow copy of your object? So what is a shallow copy? That's also an important topic. So in JavaScript, if you copy an object using this method, that what we are going to show you. So let's say we are going to create a copy of S. So how do we do it is that we say this and done. So what it does is like it creates a new object with all the values from S, all the key value pairs from S. So essentially you can understand this is a totally new object. So if I now say, so let's print it out first in the first line. Sorry, what happened? Yeah, let's print it out here. We made a copy and then we call it with the copy. If you see this dot key, it's this time it will be unchanged. And let's do a print from copy dot key as well. And let's run the code. So as you can see, S is unchanged, right? Console log is unchanged even though you have sent because you have sent a copy of S. It's not actually S, so but the copy itself, it had the value of S from S, all the values it had copied them, and once it went through the function, it was changed. Anyways, when I'm talking about a shallow copy, it means that whatever is in your object in the first level, like in a first level is like, for example here, as you can see in the key2 is holding another object, which means there's another nested object, and this object has other values as well, right? So if you could assign this variable, this object to another variable, let's say let b equals to this, sorry, if you could do this, okay, and now let's say b, okay, key is b. Now if you do an object.assign, all the keys that are defined on the level of S, for them it will do a copy. But the nested object, right, the B itself is a nested object. It will not do a shallow copy for it. It will just, you know, keep the reference. So what it will do is like after this copy, what you will have is like this, something like this actually. Key 1 copied, and key 2, it actually has a reference of B. So this is what is called a shallow copy. So let's confirm that this statement is correct. So we did an object.assign, he copy and everything. So let's do console.log copy.key2 equals s.key2. So the exactly equal operator, what it does is like it checks first, it checks from the perspective of if the references are same and also the values are same. So if we run this code now, see, it's true, because the key 2 is holding a reference. So the value key 2 was holding, it was an object, and that object, instead of doing a proper copy of that object as well, it just did a reference copy. It just you know, the copy.key2 actually has the same reference as s.key2, which is the object B. So this is what shallow copy is. And whenever we need to do a shallow copy for, like, for example, normally in normal cases, if in most of the cases actually your object will not have that much of nested objects. In that case, you can use a shallow copy to transfer to your function if you don't want your object to be mutated by that function. And like if you even want to do a deep copy, you can do that by recursively calling this object.assign on every object inside of your base object. So that's what the deep clone or deep copy in Lodash function does. Anyways, object.values is like keys, that's why I didn't cover. You can try it yourself, you'll see what it returns. So prototypes, I wanted to give a little bit coverage on that. So in JavaScript, whenever you say that it's a number, how does it defines that not the type of this thing is a number, right? So for that, JavaScript has something called prototype. So for any object that we create, it has a prototype of object. So this object here has a prototype of object. So if you do an object.typeof, if you do a typeof, you get the return value as object, right? So the prototypes are important if you ever want to create inheritance in JavaScript. For example, in JavaScript there are two types of function. One is just a pure function. One is just a function, sorry, not pure function. One is just a function, the function you call normally, right? And there's another approach of calling a function. Let's say you have a function like this, and inside of this, oh, I did not cover this, right? Okay, so inside of every function, as I was saying before, that it has a scope, right? So the scope of that function is defined by this. This is the reference to this function scope. So whatever you do inside of this is considered to be the value retained inside of that function. So let's say I did this. This means for this function there is a context, and that context has a key called B, and it has a value of 3. Okay, so if you do this, this is a function, you can do this, but it will do nothing because you are not returning anything. You're just assigning some value to its context, right? So it will not do anything. If we run the code, it prints nothing, undefined. Okay, so but there's an interesting thing that you can do with this sort of function. If you define a context inside of any function, what you can do is like you can make it a constructor function. How? Nothing, just call it using new. So once you call a function that has a that has a context like this, you actually create an object out of it. So it becomes a constructor, it becomes an object. So now C is an object that has a key which is B, and it has a value of 3. Pretty interesting, right? So you can do this actually. So now see, so if I printed C, what it is saying is in the console is that C is a type is an object of type A, because it decided that since you did a construction from this function, so it decided that okay, this object that got generated is a type of A, and it has a value, like whatever the context you define inside of the function, it became the object actually. So whenever we want to create any sort of like so before, these days you see class, right? In JavaScript there are class, but those are actually before this class and everything got introduced, there was this pattern, like where you would define object-oriented classes like this. So in that case, maybe you will define a person function which has a name, right? So you could always create new person, or maybe you define the name here, so it becomes a name here. So you could always do this. If I do console.log C and I ran this, see, I got that I have created an object of type person, and it has the name which is Bob. Awesome, right? And there's an interesting thing that you can see actually. So sorry, if I see the object dot prototype get prototype of C, I will see an interesting thing, which is person. So what is this prototype actually? You can think of it as the if you have done object-oriented programming, you know that a class is a blueprint of your, whenever you define a class, it's a blueprint of your object. So a class is a definition for the object you are going to create out of it. So whenever I say person class, that means like it's a definition, it's a blueprint for creating an object type of person, right? So in JavaScript, that's prototype. So whenever we create an object, it actually has a prototype associated with it. If we have defined our own function, if we have defined, in these days, as I said, we have now class. If we define our own classes, if you do, so it's actually, if in these days we don't do these things like this, we can literally do something like this actually. But this is actually the same what we did in the previous version using functions. It's just a syntactical sugar. So you can literally do, let's see, new person like before, and give it a name, Bob. So if you print C, you will see that it's same. See, the prototype is person. So class is, these days, it's just a syntactical sugar that was added in the new JavaScript interpreter, but it's actually doing that, the functional approach of doing things. So in maybe next session, if I take a session on advanced JavaScript, in that I will explain more about prototypes and prototypical inheritance and stuff like that. I also want to talk a little bit about the promise, and I also want to talk about like how in JavaScript how they manage, like if mostly in Node.js, I want to talk a little bit about the event queue they have, like how they manage asynchronous requests, and you will find it pretty interesting, I hope. So until next time, thank you for watching this video. I hope you all watched this, and I hope it helped you guys to understand a few basics of the JavaScript. And in the next session, it's obviously going to help you if you have understood a little bit of it, whatever I tried to say. But if you did not, that's perfectly alright. you can always reach out to me or Sarat, since Sarat is going to be the next speaker for the AngularJS session. So you can always reach out to both of us with any of your questions regarding JavaScript. Anyways, thanks, and as you can see, it's pretty late, so good night.